You can't be running your plan that you wrote in 2019 and 2025 without looking at it and evolving. And then there will be somebody like the Netflix of the future that will figure out some way to actually make this language transferable, where recruiters are just talking to each other across companies and trying to make trades.
Welcome to Beyond the Office, Building and Leading Remote Teams. I'm your host, Bill Keller. And on today's episode, I'm excited to have Jeremy Round with us. He is an accomplished HR leader, business coach, and serial entrepreneur. Jeremy, it's great to have you on the show today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Bill.
Hey, I've known you for a long time. I actually have experience working with Jeremy's coaching. He is since still in the same organization with Cultivate Advisors, but he has done a tremendous job, I know, for one of the other businesses that I was a part of, and just really enjoyed his working with him. But he has a vast amount of experience. Can you tell our audience a little bit about your background? Because I know you've worked with the likes of Yahoo, Bain Company, and even more. And I even saw the other day, did you recorded some records? Is that right? You had your own recording label?
This is all true, and you're burying the lead a little bit. I got to meet Bill. Bill's involved with a bunch of other, like tons of things, as you all probably know in your audience. And one of the things that Bill works on is in a franchise system, and we were talking to his investment team about potentially working with them as coaches with Cultivate Advisors. And Bill, by far, was the most difficult sales process interview experience I've ever had in my life. Bill had so many tough questions. And so it's funny to now be back in a situation where it's friendly fire, and Bill's bringing the heat with the questions. But I will always remember that conversation because Bill had just very thoughtful, deep questions, and he kept throwing curveballs. So glad to be back with you in this regard. Yes, I did do some music stuff. Right after college, I was kind of trying to figure out if I was going to be a creative or not, and I did a couple records of original music. They were self-published, so nothing too fancy there. But was out gigging for a bit, DJing and trying to make a go of it. And then I quickly decided I was more of a creative problem solver than a pure creative artist. And so went back to business school and kind of got out of the full-time creative game.
Well, you've moved on to a variety. I think you still are involved in several businesses beyond just the coaching as well. And so what has been a little bit of your experience in starting businesses?
Yeah, so I remember very distinctly a few years after business school, had a dinner with a bunch of friends, and we were talking about what the long term looked like. We'd all kind of been in this rat race of we want to skill up, we want to career pivot, we want to go get this next thing. And we were experiencing the next thing. And obviously, once you get to where you were planning on going, it's not necessarily what you thought it would be. And we were all talking about, hey, what do we want our long term to look like? What do we want our portfolios to look like? How do we want to build wealth? Who do we want to be as human beings, as family members, as emerging parents, spouses, etc. And one of the conversations that came up was seemingly the wealthiest, happiest, calmest people we knew were folks that had what we termed a sort of mini private equity portfolio. The guys who owned 3 Taco Bells, the folks who were invested in a bunch of real estate, whether it be with family or they found partners, these types of things. And so we started really talking through these different strategies. And the outcome of that conversation was that a couple of us decided, let's go give it a go. Not in any big risky way. We're going to keep our corporate jobs, but let's go try the entrepreneurship thing out a little bit. So we all committed some capital and we started looking at mature businesses that we could buy and hopefully improve and not destroy. So that was the
That's
whole
important.
idea. Yeah. You want it to stick around, right? So we looked at all kinds of stuff. I mean, you go on one of those business purchase, business broker type websites, and you're going to see the run of opportunities, everything from bars and restaurants to coin operated laundries to smog checks out here in California. And what we were really in search of was something with a strong brand reputation, something with steady customers and ideally steady labor, because we knew we didn't know anything. We knew that we could bring in some business expertise and some leadership skill, but ultimately we were going to be newbies and we were going to trip all over the place and fail a ton. And so what we found that we got excited about was a cleaning service. And the reason we got excited about a cleaning service, because trust you and trust me, I had no interest in necessarily cleaning people's homes or office buildings, not a strong skill of mine. as we talked to customers and as we talked to people who, also engaged with cleaning services, we realized that people care more about who cleans their house, who's in their underwear drawer, than who flies their airplane. And so we felt high confidence that we had very sticky customers. And we saw that from the data as well, that customers really didn't go anywhere. And so even though as a, sort of above board, use credit cards, tax returns, all kinds of, insured, bonded, all of that stuff, which would make the cleaning more expensive than perhaps folks who are paying under the table, we saw that loyalty and it gave us the confidence to make the purchase. So we did a deal and it went really well. We learned very quickly that we knew nothing about hiring blue collar employees. We knew very little about, B2C sales and even B2B sales at sort of this low services level. We're used to selling things like consulting or, ad space, not cleaning your porter services and your elevator spaces. And we were humbled by it. But we had a great, talented field manager who we were able to elevate to the GM role. And we were able to really collaborate and help support him on the business side. And this is kind of where the passion for supporting small business came from, because in a way we were playing that coaching role. And it also was my foray into Cultivate Advisors, because we actually hired Cultivate to help support us build out a sales and hiring process, because we were very much lost in all of that as the owners. So that was the first foray, and it kind of snowballed from there.
So that kind of led me to my second question. What got you involved in coaching? So, how did you make that change from business to moving into coaching? It looks like you were involved with Cultivate, but what led you to go in that direction?
Yeah, so while we were buying made in the USA and trying to scale it up and get a good return on it and get our entrepreneurial chops, going, my partners and I were still working our corporate jobs. I was at Yahoo at the time. And a few years later, Yahoo and AOL were being brought together to merge, which SNL famously said on Weekend Update, Yahoo and AOL are merging together because no one should have to die alone. And it created this opportunity for me to either move into a new role into one of the headquarters, which was New York or the Bay Area. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, or to resign and really go full time into entrepreneurship. And so that's what I decided to do. I moved my family to Chicago and we started buying and building more businesses. So at this point, I'd already had a drug and alcohol addiction rehab business that I was a co-founder on. That I started the year after we bought Made in the USA. And then I had my daughter, which I called my project in 2016. And so this was sort of okay, let's do the 2017 project. Let's get the entrepreneurship moving. And toyed with a bunch of stuff, did some early stage tech things, some that got traction, some that didn't, bought some retail businesses, including a children's enrichment center and a local bookstore. Ultimately, was really enjoying all of that, but also the more sort of full time I went into entrepreneurship, the more I was missing the camaraderie and teams of working in a bigger organization. And I was also seeing my strategic and leadership chops get rusty. As I was at the store trying to figure out how to solve day-to-day problems, I was losing my stronger skills, which was ultimately keeping the macro, following the finances, etc. I was just dealing with the day-to-day. I'm a fine operator, but it's not my superpower, and I was killing my superpowers to operate. And I was feeling that. And so one of the things that had happened when I moved to Chicago was Cultivate Advisors CEO Casey Clark had reached out to me when I moved and said, hey, if you ever want to catch up now that you're in the market, I'd love to chat with you, tell you what we're building. And he kind of made it clear that they were looking for entrepreneurs to join his organization. And I wasn't really looking for that. I wanted to keep building my private equity portfolio. But the deeper I went by myself and with partners that were perhaps more passive, the more I realized I needed to be part of a team and that I wasn't that strong on my own. And so I took him up on that call eventually, and we talked through, and I learned more about what they were building and the opportunity to get in, not on the ground floor, but sort of in the second era of that organization, and was really compelled to do so. And so I joined back in 2019 to really take all my consulting and entrepreneurship experience, bringing it into one and go help other entrepreneurs.
Well, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about you is you have this vast experience, but at the same time is, you're willing to say is, okay, some people would, once they go down that road, they say, oh, I have to stay committed to that and just do businesses. And I think you're still involved in some of them, but to understand where your superpower lies and how to maintain and stay in that flow, that's awesome. So kind of shifting a little bit, you talked about teams there. At Cultivate, you emphasize the importance of cultivating high performance teams. What are some of the foundational principles for creating such teams, since that it's so important for you to be part of one?
It's really interesting because there's a lot of different ways to do it, right? There's no one way, but the foundation that I have found that seemingly is present in all situations, and you hear about this in books like Good to Great and all these situations where they talk about sort of high functioning teams, is knowing where you're going, right? Like that's step one. And there's so few people that actually take step one and just start with step two or step three. And so that's the piece where it's like, people talk about who should be on the bus and what seats are on the bus, et cetera, but we need to know where the bus is going. Now, it's okay for that bus to change destinations. It's okay to revise, et cetera. But without at least a notion, a mission, a vision, you're going to struggle to get high performing teams because it's not just about having quality players. They need to know how they're going to play together. And we see this with great athletes all the time, where you could put great athletes together, but if they don't have a system or an approach or how they're going to win, they suck. It's the movies where you've got all the great actors and you're like, why is this movie terrible? It's like, there's no script. You all just signed on to hang out. And so that's where I always start. It's like, do we know what we're going to do? Then we can start to build out who should be on the bus and what are the seats on the bus. And I think one of the things that, a lot of businesses make mistakes around as well is catering the bus to the talent they have, which again is not necessarily a bad call, but you really have to think about what you need and not just build for who you've got. Because a lot of times, Netflix and Amazon are so good about this. There are people that are really talented that become obsolete because technology changes or they get out of things. And they just say, you know what, like we've had a great run. We love you. We think you're super talented. Let's help you find something else, whether it be internal or external. It's okay to walk away from great talent if the fit in terms of what you need to go do as a mission isn't there anymore.
I think I heard Reid Hoffman talking about this, that at Netflix, they don't use the terminology "we're family." They use the terminology "we're a team." And if I have to, at a certain point, if you're not performing or if this is no longer a good fit, it's my job as a coach is to change that up. And so, yeah, I can. I just heard that, just a month or two ago, he was giving that conversation. So I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and anyone who's out there listening that is curious about progressive and, transformative HR, they should read about Netflix. Like Netflix just has continued to push the envelope. They're always thinking around the corners there, and it's a place that I'm always curious whenever they publish anything because they're not standing still on it. They're not resting their laurels on anything. There's no one way to do it. They know that it's going to continue to evolve.
So that brings us, what are some of the challenges in small to medium-sized businesses, and which is really kind of your kind of core audience there, that they typically face when building and retaining talent? And how do you advise them to overcome them? Like there's some of the principles from Netflix. I mean, that's obviously a large company. Is that go down to that level, or you just have to take some of those higher level concepts and try to adapt them? What are you finding?
It's so interesting, right? To go from a world like a Yahoo, which is I believe the biggest headcount organization I've been part of, and then deal with organizations that have 1, 2, 3 people in them. Yahoo, if you spilled coffee on your computer, you'd have a new computer on your desk by that afternoon that's programmed and ready for you. You do that as an entrepreneur, you're SOL, right? That is a rough situation because you are the janitor, you are IT, you are procurement, you're going to go solve that all on your own, and your day and week is probably shot. In terms of that team building piece, it does still come back to where is the organization going and how does this individual's role fit into it, and how are we going to help support them and hold accountability to that? And that doesn't change by size of organization. I think it gets easier in larger organizations, so to speak, but it also gets more rigid. And I think a lot of people appreciate the ability to not have to paint by numbers and create a little bit of what could change and evolve, not just execute someone else's vision. And I think that's one of the distinct advantages a small or medium-sized business has in terms of just career development opportunities and impact opportunities for an individual. But my God, it's hard, right? You're competing with people who are going to pay more, who are going to create more stability. And so you're really selling on a vision. You've got to get that purpose piece. You've got to support them in their career path. For many people, small, medium business as a employee is about the flexibility they're looking for, and it's sort of matching the life they want. And this is very much the key theme of HR 2020 plus, right? Sort of the post-COVID world. And you're hearing all this return to office stuff. And a lot of that's about not really understanding how to do accountability, not really understanding how to get ownership into your team. It's this idea that FaceTime equates outcomes, which is ridiculous. It's like effort equating outcomes, which is a very sort of elementary school vision on how to lead. I know everyone who is running a payroll, who has people working for them, kind of want to see the outcomes, but that's the hard work you have to do up front. You have to actually define what will this role look like to be successful. Let's give them that runway. Let's build some trust, and let's hold tension and accountability at certain milestones so that they can do that. Let's not randomly require certain things. And I'm not against in office at all. I miss it as somebody who's been remote for a very long time and is very social, as you can probably tell by the fact that I haven't let Bill speak at all. I
Don't
get
worry,
it.
they're not here to hear me, right? They're here to hear you. So
I
that's
suppose. You have such a good announcer voice, though. I was really impressed with that intro. That was very good.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. Don Pardo, yeah, for the old game show days.
Yeah, it's very good. I think that's the thing, and I'll talk to clients and, our clients, our members, our partners, our vendors about this kind of thing all the time. Are you doing something as a shortcut or as a proxy versus this is actually the right way to do it? There's a law firm that we've worked with that's based in Columbus, Ohio, that is really struggling with, it's a small firm. And they've got the big firms who can just say, hey, we've got all these resources, we've got overlap and redundancy. We can pay a lot and we can squeeze them for hours and we're good to go. And he doesn't want that. He doesn't want anything like that. He wants a firm that can, be more balanced, but still give those same level of client results. And so he is struggling with how to create flexibility in a world where people want to be able to work remotely or work asynchronously. And he's so used to you show up in your suit and tie and you put in your hours. And we're just, that world is becoming obsolete. Yes, it exists in many places, but our younger workers are not going to stand for it, and you're going to have trouble retaining them. And so it doesn't mean that won't work hard. It doesn't mean they're not good. They're just very mission oriented and they know a lot more about what they want than, us old guys who are just kind of like, yeah, you pay me as much as you can and I'll sweat and get it done. The younger people are really just smarter. We complain about them, but they're smarter. They're holding their boundaries in a way we never did. And that's a reality of, today.
And I think that's going to require some more intentionality, probably some unlearning of some things that we thought, like you said, these proxies. I love that when you talk about, what is that proxy that we say, oh, being in the office and being at your desk is equivalent to effectiveness.
Right.
Because that's really, we need to find a new way rather than going as, okay, basically saying, I don't have the metrics to understand if my team's actually being effective. So I just need to keep them at their desk and hope and pray that they work as hard as they can. Right. And then we're moving in the right direction.
Which is, such a painful thing. I mean, it really harkens back to the assembly line thinking, which makes sense if you're physically at a station on an assembly line that either can't progress or gets backed up. You probably will physically rise to the occasion, but this makes no sense in asynchronous world where you're working in the cloud. It's laziness, for lack of a better term, by leadership. And I'm a sports guy and I'm always trying to figure out, sports have figured out how to measure everything. And they didn't, right? Like we grew up and it was just like it was batting average and home runs and RBIs. And now no one even talks about batting average because it's like, oh, we actually came up with better metrics to evaluate how teams win and lose. And I just feel like a lot of this is actually organizations not taking the time to do much more than say, I'm going to assess talent. I found somebody who has good experience, seems like they're a character fit. seems like they want to work hard, and then they're failing, it's on the employee. And it's like, no, that's the system not taking advantage of that skill and not giving them a clear mandate, and helping them hit it. So I'm always trying to figure out, how could we even live in a world where we could like trade employees, right? Where I could look at the what's on the back of the cards of Bill's team and be like, oh, I'm looking for somebody who has really good blah blah blah, and he's like, oh, I'm looking for this, and we trade cards because we actually have that level of data accuracy on performance. That's kind of where we need to go. It's an impossible task, but like that's kind of the framework that I think about, that it should be that measurable, that it would feel like they're an athlete.
I love that. So what would that look like? How would you, and especially with AI coming on board, how do you see, and we were going to talk a little bit more about this later, but, how do you envision that this could be? Because I'd love to give people a vision for the future that may not be here. Maybe it's not even attainable right now, but it's something for us to shoot for. What do you see that looks like? What type of metrics or how would you see this working?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of the internal view, right? So when I talk about this vision of everyone having a baseball card, it's almost like, how do we get to a common language across all businesses such that this is an assist and this is a three-pointer, right? And obviously that would take some significant efforting and probably some organizations that just get really good at measuring things, where it's not just like, oh, I'm going to have an annual review. I'm going to share with you what you in December, I'm going to share with you what you did in March that pissed me off. And you can't do anything about it, and it's not helpful, right? So like, how do we move to this world where we are giving real-time feedback? People have a scoreboard or a dashboard by which they're operating and understanding their performance, even in the soft skill roles, right? Like, even how do I evaluate myself as a leader of HR in an organization? What metrics? How do I force a definition of that, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, we can say an HR person's role is to set the culture, make sure people get paid on time, have their benefits, grow as human beings. But what is all of that about? It's about hiring and retention. And let's face it, we're talking about HR as well, risk mitigation, lawsuits, et cetera, right? These would be fair metrics to measure a head of HR by, right? How long does the average employee stay? Their satisfaction score, right? Like, we actually can take something that is super qualitative and wiggly and ambiguous and turn it into hard metrics. And so I think that's the challenge of really any role for a manager. And again, it rolls all the way back up to the leader and leadership team. Hey, we want to go do this. Cool. Here are the initiatives that we need to go hit to do this. Here's what we need to do with our runway of what we're already doing. Great. How does this cascade into our different departments? Great. What does this mean that Bill needs to go do? How do I measure that? What's Bill going to be responsible for in February? How do I make sure he's bought into that? Not just that this was randomly assigned to him and he thinks it's nonsense, but he sees how this fits in. And then we measure it and the scoreboard starts to get built. And then there will be somebody like the Netflix of the future that will figure out some way to actually make this language transferable, where recruiters are just talking to each other across companies and trying to make trades. Like, I do think that that's possible, especially with AI, to try to figure out things like, oh, we call it this. Oh, this is actually a synonym and this is the same thing. Okay, now we have common language. I do think that's plausible. And it gets interesting in a world where you think, oh, okay, we could become the NFL with, all these players making certain amounts and we actually could trade them and that kind of thing. It could be really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds, I'd never thought of that before. It's a very interesting idea. And you talked about getting immediate feedback. It's one of the things that I'm working on right now with my automation team. Because we have a staffing team, we've been we'll get quarterly reviews, sometimes, biannual reviews, or sometimes people, want to push it off and say, oh, we're good with the employee, we'll just do it once a year. And I kowtow to their wishes. I really wish we could get more immediate feedback so we could iterate in our process more quickly. And one of the things that I'm working on right now with our team is to do an app, which is basically for a manager on a weekly basis, because typically we have 10 metrics that we're trying to, or 10 KPIs as part of that review process that we're asking them to talk about. And I kind of took a page from inventory management, which is cycle counting, and said, okay, rather than doing this once a year, once a quarter, whatever this is, could we do this on an ongoing weekly basis? So the idea is on Friday afternoon, which which is, you get a message on an app and says, how did this person do this week? And it's actually an emoji, like 3 emojis: sad face, neutral face, happy face, more from just an emotional reaction before we even move into the KPIs. And just to see is, how did they do? How is the boss feeling about this particular employee? And then, maybe 2 emotional questions like that, and then move into, if they're getting a negative on those emotional questions, like find out what happened that week, what took them down. And then if everything's going well, then move into the KPIs. So the negative emotion in the moment isn't affecting, like we have this recency bias, and where, like I've had a bad week, but maybe the last 9 weeks were awesome, but we're kind of focused on this week. So, during a good week, we focus on the KPI, and then those KPIs roll over every 10 to 12 weeks. And then there's actually a reward and gamification to make sure that people are responding to those. And so that's my take on how to try to get more immediate feedback. And at the same time is then on the employee side is just like in Good to Great talks about, what is that metric that you can have through all the company that will help guide everybody's action. I'm not sure if one metric is appropriate, but as few as possible.
Right.
And then we push that out to the employees, like, here's the metric for the week, and then actually give them helpful hints and tips, and then also hopefully encouraging them to come up with their own, what is going to move that number and how can you impact that number. And so really feeding into a more immediate type of feedback loop for them.
Yeah, I love that. And I think for anyone that is trying to evaluate their own feedback loops and potentially attaching incentives or compensation systems to it, that's a whole nother level of complexity, right? I think about our bookkeeping organization, Breakwater, that you were talking about earlier. And this is this is a field, right? Bookkeeping in general, heavily being disrupted by technology, and ripe for it, right? For a long time, I've been saying shame on Intuit for a long time. For those of you that are QuickBooks users, QuickBooks is kind of the only game in town. There's a few other things out there, but like 80% market share, QuickBooks is just crushing. And yet their AI and technology has actually not like done that much automated bookkeeping for anyone, which has been shocking to me. I'm like, why are they not trying to keep any sort of edge? And I've not figured that out. But the little guys, the cheaper offshore type options, et cetera, are getting driven out of business. One went out just this past 2024 called Bench, which had been around for a while.
Like 35,000 customers, I believe, and 600 employees. They believe they were out of Vancouver.
And
crazy.
Overnight. And it's like, this is primarily a technology situation. I think Bench it wasn't that Bench was a traditional, they weren't doing it in QuickBooks. They were doing it in their own software. And there were a few other things going on there. But this is an industry that's ripe for technological disruption and ultimately needs to level up or level down. The middle is no longer going to be a place where people can play. You can either be low stakes, get the bookkeeping done for a CPA, or high stakes, create some value and support the organization to make better decisions, right? And what's interesting is when you think about bookkeepers, this is not necessarily, and I'm going to use some generalities here, right? But this is not necessarily a group of people that are sitting on the cutting edge of technology use. A lot of times these are folks that kind of want to get their hands dirty, want to engage with counting the beans, right? And this is also not necessarily a group, again, there are plenty amongst that this doesn't fit, but this is also not necessarily a group that's like raising their hand to rush into board meetings to, give financial advice. This is a group that's trying to prepare financials and keep the, backbeat of your office, your financial ops flowing. I don't think there's space for that anymore. And so what you're forcing now is either people to sort of be dinosaurs, which means that their value is going to decrease because ultimately technology is going to do some more of this stuff. So they either have to get faster or just appreciate that their rate will go down, or they have to embrace it. And what's really strange about this is I think a lot of these folks are not necessarily financially driven, even though they spend all their time on financials. Right? You got a lot of people who are doing this because they like the flexibility, they like the asynchronous, they like the not necessarily having to talk to anyone other than to grab something or share the reporting. And ultimately, they can make a lot more money if they move faster and they go have conversations. But if you're running a bookkeeping company, you can't just say, hey, I'll pay you more if you work faster, because 9 out of 10 have no interest in that. That's not what they're trying to solve. And that's my very long-winded point here, which is ultimately, you still have to match the incentives back to the people you're working with. And so for this group in particular, this is a group in terms of our, Breakwater bookkeeping, that is much more incentivized around client impact than actual personal financial benefit. And so we have to angle everything in terms of improving our operations in that it supports their job becoming easier so that they can do more for their clients and help their clients do better. If they're making more money, that's a nice to have. That is not at the forefront. Whereas if you're dealing with a sales organization, a production organization, a consulting organization, it'd be the exact opposite. Right. And so this is also a factor of not just how you measure this stuff, but what you then put against this stuff in terms of incentives to try to drive these behaviors. For some people, it's much more intrinsic, and for some people, it's super extrinsic. And there's no judgment on any of that. It's just you need to know it and know that that's the system that you're playing in your organization.
It's amazing. Something that I don't know if it's part of this conversation. I think we're moving into this world where things are moving so quickly. I think it's going to be really hard for people to adapt in meaningful ways. And I'm not sure, what's going to happen if people are going to left behind. But I know for my own team and the staffing side, I'm encouraging them. I'm like, you got to keep moving forward in this because you're going to get run over, right? It is amazing, how quickly AI has come up. And like you said, is the rate's either going to go down and, there's still going to be this manual process. And I think going back to what you talked about Intuit, I think basically they have such market share that there's a risk in doing AI.
Yeah, fair.
And basically as they go, hey, if this goes wrong, some AI does something wrong and across a whole bunch of people's books, that's a risk to me. Right now I have that market share. I don't really need to, I can delay this. And so by pushing it off, I'll delay some of the risk that possibly goes with that. But regardless, it is coming. And I've seen this happen. And that's when I've been encouraging them. I'm like, you need to move beyond just giving, the obvious from the P&L. Yeah, we want the P&L to be accurate, but we need to move beyond to what are some insights from these numbers and start to ask the question in a really serious way to say is what are the levers that this business owner could pull to really move the needle? And I don't think they're quite there yet. I'm not quite sure how to get them there, but I think it's kind of a combination of AI and them working together. But it's going to take some learning and unlearning and relearning, and there's a process there. So
100%. Yeah, there's so many concerns and tentative behaviors and overexcitements around these technologies. And you're right. I think we're all getting run over. I was frustrated with my Apple Watch. I felt like it, needed all of this stuff for me, and it wasn't getting me what I wanted, and its battery life was poor. And so I, for the holidays, got a Garmin watch for my family, and I need hours of training to use this thing. It's not intuitive at all. I'll get there, but everything, these are all big steps. And I think that the thing is that it's not like we take on a new technology and we get 3-5 years of runway, 10 years of runway like we used to. It's months, it's days.
So I think it was one of the writers of the book Bold, and he was talking about this process that we just need to be prepared that we could go through this process of developing a new software or new technology, and we could be interrupted in a matter of days. And, it's just going to be part of this future that we're living in this AI age. And I think that's another part, not only just the rapid movement that we have to, in the speed at which things are happening, but the emotional, being able to take the change and being able to handle it emotionally is going to be something that we're not quite prepared for.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, we're all in that mindset of openness at different degrees right now. But for me, as I think about how to try to move as quickly as possible without overwhelming, without adding undue stress, I'm really trying to just figure out how to get rid of noise, because I just need to appreciate that I'm not going to keep up, and that I, very quickly am going to be a dinosaur if I'm not already. But I think noise is sort of the biggest enemy of the mid-career, late-career person. Where it's just how do you keep your mind open? How do you just digest a little bit? How do you just get a little bit better each day, right? Again, thinking back to sports, it's those great athletes just had one very clear vision and just pushed themselves to be a little bit better and a little bit healthier every day. And that's good enough, right? The game is going to evolve past you and pass you up eventually, but how do you stay on your edge as long as possible? It's getting rid of the noise, keeping it simple, keeping that focus.
So I'm curious with this AI, and I love that thought. How are you helping your coaching clients, as AI transforms industries, how are you helping them to integrate AI into their operations effectively? Because for some, I'm sure it is overwhelming.
It's such an interesting conversation just because there's such huge disparities in usage still at this point. You'll still meet people that are like, "What's ChatGPT?" And you're like, "Really?" I mean, this is it's as big a deal as the moon landing at this point. Like, we have captured all of human intelligence, and it will talk to you immediately. Like, it's crazy. The thing that we are primarily supporting clients with across all of our organizations in terms of AI is really how to think about how to free up time, right? And how to ask thoughtful questions of it. I think it's a dumb example, but it was a fun one. My daughter has been home for winter break, and we've been trying to figure out everything to fill time. And the other day she said, let's design a theme park across our house, and let's film it and do all this stuff. And I'm thinking, oh my God, my house is going to be destroyed. And so I'm like, let's conceptually design it. Let's build a map. Let's do. And so she said, well, why don't we ask your computer how to do that? And because she's seen ChatGPT. And so I was like, oh, that's a really clever idea, right? Like, ask ChatGPT basically, how do we start this game that we're making up, right? We want to design a theme park. And it was like, this is how I could help you. You come with some ideas on what you want this theme park to be. We can help with visuals. We can help with merchandise. We can help with how you might market it. And it really helped narrow our task down. So we started writing down what rides we wanted to have and what they'd be like and themes. And I can send these to you after. We've got these posters. We've got pictures of merch. We've got pricing. We started working on music. I mean, it's crazy. Like, we're very excited about this, non-existent theme park and how amazing it is. And so, coming back to the clients, for us, it's really about trying to help with efficiencies right now and less on the strategies. I don't want people to use AI too much to do their key thinking. I want them to use it more as a time saver and as an ability to iterate to get to a better answer. I think when people come with a blank slate and it's just like, how do I win as a marketing firm? It's like, you're going to get the average answer. It's the same as if you looked it up on Google, right? But if you say, hey, this is how we do, and this is where we are, and this is what we're struggling with, you might get some very interesting and helpful feedback in that way.
I think it's really important to put as much information in as possible. I don't know if you've done this yet. If you're talking to AI, I probably talk to AI more than I talk to my wife. But there was a question that came up to ask ChatGPT, what do you know about me that I might not know about myself?
Oh, wow.
And it is fascinating what it comes up with. You're like, wow, that's pretty accurate, especially if you use it for everything. It's pretty amazing. So I think the more information you put into it, the more context and understanding what the problems and understanding how to prompt it. And then, when you're not getting good information out, and that's I think a real skill to understand is like, how do I use this as a tool, not just as a crutch, right?
Right.
What is that? And so I really appreciate that, not to let it do all your thinking for you, but, help it to refine your thinking. And the big thing for me this year is really AI agents in how that's going to be changing the marketplace. For many people, they're still, working on ChatGPT, but if you're not at that AI agent stage, I think there's this zero shot prompting that most people were doing. But then I think, going to the next level and then refining that through putting it back through with another prompt and maybe going to another LLM, and so we can get even greater output. So it's something that I'm looking into and really focused on for 2025 as far as the AI scene is concerned.
I love that. And while you were telling me that, I did put the prompt in, so I will get to read what my
I won't make you read it out loud here in front of us all. But
I've been told to do the roast me one. I don't know if you've done that.
I have not done that one.
So I had it roast me. I was using ChatGPT as a partner to help support me. Now I'm bringing up theme parks for a second time. I do have an unhealthy theme park obsession. I like to try to get on all of the rides in a single operating day at a resort. And so I did this at Disneyland and got on 48 rides in a single day, then did it at Disneyland Paris, and I attempted Walt Disney World this past December. Fell short because 2 rides went out of operation while I was in the line. But I spent a lot of time with ChatGPT supporting this because Walt Disney World is a massive, massive, massive map to conquer, as opposed to Disneyland, which is a much smaller footprint. And so when I asked it to roast me, it was hilarious. It was like, you're going to get blisters and bunions, and you're a little too obsessed with theme parks for a man your age. And it was just really funny and fair. It was like, I can't discredit any of this stuff.
So Kind of still staying on the AI theme, for small, medium-sized businesses that are hesitant to adopt AI, what steps are you recommending to start exploring its potential benefits? Because you talked about, helping with efficiencies. Where are some of the first steps of the greatest, returns for most of your businesses that you're coaching?
So in terms of initial hesitancy, it's usually like, let's jump into a screen share, right? It's, they're like, what are you using this for really? And it's like, okay, you just asked me this question, client. I'm gonna punch it in, look what it says, right? And it's like, yeah, you don't even need me anymore. Look at what this gives you, right? But like we have to process this and we have to, so that's always piece one, is just like literally flip the screen to show them the amazing immediacy and helpfulness that it is. A typical place of starting is usually with communications. People get really stuck on communications. Jerry Seinfeld famously says the number one fear is public speaking, which means if someone's giving a eulogy, that everyone else would prefer to be in the box than giving the eulogy, right? And communication is just a thing that holds most people up, or they do it poorly. So it's either they're just kind of like, I'm going to be trash at it and just live with it, or I get stuck in my own head. And so this is a place where we say, hey, give some initial ideas or some bullets to the chat GPT and let it draft something for you. And that's where they're like, oh my God, I can take what's bouncing around in my head and not have the 2 hours of work after that, but more have 20 minutes of work after that, because I've already figured out the meat of what I want to say. And I'm going to let someone else say it, and then I'm going to edit it back into my voice. And I've just turned a 2 hour task into 20 minutes. So that's usually a first place. And then as they build some trust and also understand the faults of it, right? ChatGPT is a lot that's incorrect because it is, the information of the internet. So there's a lot that's wrong in there. And you have to learn that too. As trust is built on the communication side, then it starts to be like, hey, can we look at some of these processes? Can we think about these? You almost get to start putting some of your playbook in and get some commentary for evolution. We also like to take, hey, we have these goals. Here's what we're thinking. And it's like, hey, have you thought about this? We don't think this might work, right? It's almost feedback on your plan. That's sort of a tertiary spot that I'm seeing advisors use it as well.
I'm curious, outside of AI, what role does accountability play in driving sustainable success? Like, how do you, is that the main driver? Like, as people look at businesses in the future, like what's going to make them successful? Like in your mind, especially you guys have so much knowledge. You've seen so many businesses, you get to see it all. And so like, I'm sure you see, is there like one main reason why people fail, or is it, what is it that's going to drive that success for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason for failure is almost easier than the success question. I do think the commonality of failure, and there are macro things, the franchise we were talking about earlier, there's been some massive shifts in the weight loss industry that have made that world very difficult, that they should have seen around the corners on, and you and I were talking about, and we won't name any names, but obviously
Yep.
that bed was not clean, so to speak. But planning, right? Like it always still comes back to having a plan. If you don't have a plan, and I think it's no, I can't think of his name, John Wooden, who I'm sure it's other coaches too, but John Wooden, who said, if you fail to prepare to fail, right? And so there's just a strong commonality of people jumping to step two instead of slowing down to reflect on, where am I going, right? And so again, that intentionality that we talked about, earlier in the conversation, this is a key death knell for so many organizations that are just like, I'm gonna build the best thing, but building the best thing often doesn't win, right? Like there have been so many best things that haven't come in first. Betamax is such a perfect example, right? I mean, all these things that we know and love. I was looking. We rented Wicked last night, and I was looking at the box office numbers for 2024. Because I had some curiosity around, where did everything land up? And I had to go down 15 titles before there was anything that was original. Everything else was based on something that was previous IP, a sequel, a musical that had been on stage for decades, etc. And it was not shocking at all, but at the same time, like shame on us. Like where have we gone as humanity? To not progress, to not tell new stories, to not be interesting, and yet that's where we are, and that's how we're functioning. I think ultimately failure is coming from this lack of planning, this lack of intention, this lack of direction. Success will often be supported by that planning, but that's not enough, right? So now you have to go execute. One of my key learnings in business school, because I went being like, oh, you just need to have a great idea, right? To this best product idea.
build a mousetrap and the world will be beat a path to your door, I believe.
Right, right.
Build-
And then you sit alone and you die poor, right? It's all about execution. And so this is where really slowing down on, yeah, you got to be good. You can't be trash, but you really got to execute well. You've got to have an organization that knows what it does well, this flywheel concept that you're talking about earlier, right? And keep getting better at it and keep driving that. And that's not easy, right? This is all the stats and stuff we're talking about. This is all the accountability. This is, people talk about a business plan. That's not actually like some magic financial model. That's actually like, who are we and how are we going to win and how are we going to do this, right? And that's more interesting on the back of the napkin than the finance. The finance is almost actually just the, okay, does this work? Now that we've come up with this idea, can we actually make sure that the numbers will suss out we haven't built something that costs more to make than we can charge for it. The financials are second on that. It's how are we going to do this? And then we look at the financials. So anyways, I am meandering a bit here, but I think the success really does come from thinking through this plan and figuring out sort of functionally how you're going to attack it and then just chipping away at that and getting better at it. And the companies that move really fast on this are the ones that hold really, really high tension to we're going to crush in these things. We're going to have very little flexibility around allowing things to, flail. It's like, no, we're going to fail fast and get the hell out because you're going to flunk. Like you have to fail along the way. There's no one that just gets it right every step. But how long you let them fail, how long you hold on to a really good employee because they're a good culture fit, but they have no purpose, right? These are the challenges that we as humans make the wrong call. We work with empathy, but if your goal is to grow as fast as possible, those are often the wrong decisions. Your instincts are actually telling you the wrong thing. You have to, kill your bad decisions, fail quickly, learn from them, and move on. That's really the big difference. For us poker players out there, it's like you got to win big pots, but you got to lose small ones. If you overcommit on the ones you're losing, you're off the table. And so it's like you're going to lose, but you just got to keep those losses small. You got to cut bait and walk. And business is very much the same way. Otherwise, it's a slow. If you're losing big ones and winning big ones, it's going to be a very slow build. You're going to get 3-5% growth. Fine, you'll get there, but that's not necessarily what you're in pursuit of. So you got to limit that downside.
And I think Richard Branson was really good at that, and talked about in many of his books how, he looks like this crazy guy who would go out into all these different industries. But in every one of the industries that he went into, he really tried to make sure that he would limit his risk there. So I think making sure that you can get out. So is that the one, if you could give one piece of advice to a business owner who's looking to scale, what would it be? Would it be that fail fast and fail forward, or is there something else that's out there?
I mean, that's a good one. What would I tell anyone? I think I would say just, don't stay static. I think you have to constantly, yes, give yourself a little bit of runway. I'm not saying you have to, but you can't be running your plan that you wrote in 2019 and 2025 without looking at it and evolving, et cetera. And we can all think of those businesses. We can think in our own backyards, our neighborhoods, our own investments, right? There are ones that are still just trotting out the same thing and everyone else has changed. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Absolutely. So I could talk all the afternoon, but I appreciate your time. Curious, where can people find more about you and Cultivate?
Yeah.
Cultivate's a great organization. So if you're looking for business advisory, they're awesome. So where can people find more about you?
Yeah, so we are a group of companies called Cultivate Brands. Cultivate Advisors is our original organization. You can find out more about us at cultivateadvisors.com. We have a few other organizations, including Petra Coach, which helps teams scale up. We've got Breakwater that we mentioned before, which is our bookkeeping organization. And we have a brand new organization called Propel Your Business, which is for coaching firms as a software and additional support to help you build your firm. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Jeremy Round. You can also follow my exploits at theme parks at Park Hacking on YouTube or on Instagram as well. Yeah, we're always excited to help people. Never looking to try to get people in as clients or any sort of sales thing. I'm on the HR side, so I'm really trying to help people live their lives the way they want to and do great things. And so if it's something that you think we can help you with or anything, don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show today, and from Beyond the Office, hopefully see you next time. Thanks so much.